1.
Hey everyone, welcome to Powering Through Adversity, a series where we talk about how you can overcome adversity in the COVID-19 world.
If you've been laid off or are feeling unsure about your financial situation, we want you to know you are not alone and we want to help.
I'm Sam Kwong, aka Sammy K.
And I'm Matt Diamond, aka Matty D. And we are both reformed CPAs turned veteran recruiters inspired to support our global community that have been economically impacted by COVID-19 and its aftermath.
We hope you enjoy the show. Dude, Matt, you got to do this with me, man. Breathing exercise. You ready?
Yeah, I got a lot of oxygen from that. All right, let's do it. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Powering Through Adversity. We are super excited to talk about today's topic because we feel it's something everyone is dealing with right now. Fear. In this episode, we're going to dive deep in how to confront, identify, define, and start to take action on your fears. It is our belief that the unknown defined fear is always going to be scarier than that is known and defined. And in today's episode, we take great steps to cultivate resilience in the face of your fears and overall adversity. All right. Before we jump in, I just want to talk about some current events, Sam, because I've just been blown away. We are completely in unprecedented times, and I think we are seeing people and companies doing some really nutsy things.
Right.
And I was talking about this with you before we got on the podcast, but adversity to me really reveals character. It doesn't change it. And so, like I said, we're really seeing the true nature of companies and people come out because they've been kind of put in against the wall. And so I know you sent it to me about a week back, but I want to talk about the layoffs of the company called Bird. It's one of those scooter companies out there based in LA. And talk about that a little bit, because the way they went about laying off, I think it was a little over 400 people of their staff, was just, I'm going to go ahead and say it, asinine, ridiculous. So why don't we start out by maybe you kind of giving everyone the background about what happened there in the context, and then we can actually share the recording, because I think it's just ridiculous.
So based off of the research that I've gathered, first and foremost, I want to make the point, I'm not here to tarnish the brand of Bird. We could white label it and call it XYZ company. But basically, the summary here is that there was 400 employees. They were put on a Zoom call that lasted 2 minutes and were told that you don't have to come back. You're no longer part of our company. And so why is this important? I mean, Matt, you're totally right. During this time now, so many unprecedented things happening, but I feel as if we as people and companies, essentially because people are the ones that drive companies, we could do a better job in treating each other a little bit more fairly. And so I really think that when we're assessing this, I really want to take a look and say, hindsight, yes, it's 2020, but I think things could have been done a lot differently. What do you think about that, Matt?
I agree, right? And I think ultimately I wanted to give everyone the context and put the information out there. And as you said, we're not here to tarnish the brand of Bird. And ultimately, this is information that we've got through news sources and third-party sources. We were not
public.
directly public knowledge, so we weren't directly impacted by this, and so we are commenting on the information that is out there, which again may be true or not. And I think in this day and the way that news is, you really have to take everything in a grain of salt. So I want to say that at the outset, right, as you kind of mentioned, because ultimately maybe things truly were differently. At any rate, the context is this. As you said, they took 406 people. They sent them, I believe, a Zoom link the day of. From what I read, people across the company were scrambling to figure out who was on the Zoom, this kind of ambiguous, kind of ominous Zoom link that all it said was COVID-19. And people are running around to all their peers saying, are you on it? Are you not on it? And then I heard through the grapevine, or read through the grapevine, that because Zoom has some restrictions around how many people or whatever their license was could be on one webinar at some time. Some of the people that were even invited weren't even invited to the web, or couldn't even get into it because there was a cap on the number of users that could be in there at any one time. And then lastly, and we'll play the clip of what, the 2 minutes that, has been released in the public in a moment. But after they terminated everyone, rather than giving everyone time to, exchange information and try to stay in touch with people that they've worked with for, months, if not years, they had written a script, again, allegedly through IT to remote prevent access for everyone that was terminated from getting in their their computers. So pretty much the sequence was webinar happened, 2 minutes, you're terminated. And then afterwards, you can't even get back into your machine to just, close out your work, talk to people. A lot of managers that were laid off didn't even have the chance to connect with their teams that were laid off too, right? Matt, and they had to text them outside.
Matt, the IT guy that was part of the plan got the punt as well.
The guy that wrote the script he thought that this was something that was just like for security in test mode. He never knew that it was going to be used in this way, and he was part of the layoffs, which is just horrible. They took a tool that he built for evil and then terminated him as well through that. So let's play the clip because we want to put the information out there, and then we can talk about like a debrief on it.
Okay, so let's play the clip.
I'm playing it.
I also want to acknowledge that, like most everything we're experiencing right now, this is a suboptimal way to deliver such a message. We've all watched the COVID-19 pandemic radically and quickly disrupt our way of life in as little as 4 short weeks, with prolonged changes that are yet to be fully known or seen. COVID-19 has also had a massive impact on our business, one that has forced our leadership team and our board of directors to make many extremely difficult and painful decisions. One of those decisions is to eliminate a number of roles at the company. Unfortunately, your role is impacted by this decision, and Friday, April 3rd, will be your last day with Bird. This is very difficult to hear during an already challenging time. Please know that I, along with all of the leadership team at Bird, recognize and are grateful for you. Thank you for helping build Bird and for making it so very, very, very special. When we come out of the other side of this unimaginable storm and begin to scale up, unpause markets, increase fleets, support riders, build products, and more, we hope we can work together again. As a next step, please check your personal email later today for specifics with regard to severance, medical benefits, an extended window to exercise options, and additional resources available to you from Bird. We know you will have a number of questions upon receiving this news and encourage you to reach out to talent-support@bird.co. We will respond to all questions as immediately as possible. Thank you. Be safe and be well.
So Sam, let's talk about that clip that we just played. For me, I'm just blown away. One, just a couple takeaways. I actually don't blame the woman that was giving it, because it sounds like she was just reading off a script. And she almost was just taking orders. She seemed even melancholy. So I really feel bad for her. Because again, who knows? Maybe she was like laid off shortly after this webinar as well. And she was kind of the last one out the door. I think what I took away most, which, they start out the beginning, which is this is a suboptimal way to deliver this message. And that to me just kind of says it all. Again, revealing their character or the character of the organization, because they knew this wasn't the best way to go about this. There was like a knowing this isn't right and we're doing it anyway. And I think out of all of that, right? That's what kind of, I think, stuck with me as like, this just really sucks. What are your thoughts?
Sorry, I can't breathe right now. Every time I listen to that, like a lot of emotion flows, you know? So let me gather my thoughts here.
Let them
So
have it, Sam.
I know, I know. You can see the rage building up, but again, that's
your
my
your
ego
face is
talking,
turning
right?
red.
Yeah, from yellow to red. So so here's my thoughts, okay? Number one, when anything happens, you know, call it at a company, call it your personal task, whatever it is, it's the intentions. Were they deliberate? That's the first thing I look at. Second of all, as leaders and execs of a company, you got to have empathy. And I felt like there was a lack of empathy, you know, before actually hitting this process, right? Of saying, you know what, we're going to lay off 400 people. And the biggest point here is that I question, how can you call your employees family when you spend 2 minutes to release them in a group format? And think about it, right? Like, you wouldn't even break up with your significant other over a Zoom call, would you? I mean,
Yeah, it's like the company equivalent of breaking up with your significant other over a text to
yeah.
400 people at once. That's the way I kind of read this.
Yeah, and Matt, it's kind of funny. You remember back in high school where you break up over calls or text, or I think in my case, I've heard a lot of friends where they just don't talk about it, and then you know how time passes by, and you're like, okay, I guess we're broken up, right? And so I think this is the point that I'm trying to get, whereas if you're hiring and firing, it should take an equal amount of time, if not a similar amount of time. So for example, Matt, you and I, we both do recruiting. We know it takes anywhere from 1 to 3 months to source, hire, and onboard a candidate. However, when you fire them, why are we so much more transactional, right? Why is it only taking 2 minutes? And to top that off, I would say the two biggest points again is intentions and lack of empathy. So 400 lives were affected because of this, quite frankly, because of, you know, the lack of empathy there. And honestly, the brand is also tarnished as well. Anytime I see anything associated with this company or any company that would perform this type of act, I think of it as, you know, a 2 minute transactional layoff. And I think of it as a company where, do you really care about people? And then that's why I always say it fires me up, because anything that is associated with, you know, poor ethics or, you know, lack of empathy for people, which is all we really have in this world, is people, relationships. That's where I start to, you know, beg the question, hey, are you guys positive energy, white space, or are you guys a little bit dark or gray energy in the gray and black space, right? And so, Matt, I wanted to ask you and punt this back over to you because, you know, there's all this talk that, hey, you know, it was a robotic voice. You know, obviously the company is saying it's not, but I think regardless, 2 minutes, robotic or not, it's transactional. But what are your thoughts about all this?
I think ultimately there is no good way to lay off people. Again, but there's definitely bad ways to do it. And
Right.
ultimately, I think companies don't give their employees enough credit to be involved with the problem and solving it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by this is, you know, I have a story in a company of mine that is going through a lot of adversity right now, and I don't know what the end in sight will look like for them, but I think it's the white space strategy. It's the antithesis of the bird situation. And it's a company based in Washington. I believe they're in Seattle, called Gravity Payments. Have you heard about them?
No, I haven't. Enlighten me.
So their CEO, and you might have heard about this, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, Business Insider did a huge article on them, and it went viral because the CEO was, you know, getting a salary of $1 million, and he said, you know what, my employees deserve to be, you know, taken care of fairly and get a proper wage. And he cut his salary, I want to say, to $70,000 and took the rest of the money and allocated it among his employees so that the lowest salary at the company was, I want to say, $65,000 or $70,000 above. And that to me shows an individual that runs an organization where he really truly puts his people first. And now fast forward to now, Gravity Payments is a payment processing company that focuses on small businesses. So just like Bird, in their own way, they have been hugely negatively impacted by what's going on with COVID-19.
Right.
And what has blown me away is the goodwill that the CEO built back then, or he has on a day-to-day basis as he's grown through his company. He said, you know what? It doesn't seem right for us to raise prices and pass it on to the consumer because there's small businesses. And without doing that, we are going to have to figure out a way to either furlough, cut salaries or potentially lay off. And he brought everyone in on all's hands, was very transparent with the whole company and the employees, and said, you know, guys, I want to get through this. I want to get through this with everyone on board, and I don't know what the solution is. What do you guys think we should do? And they went around and had a long all hands. And the crazy part of it is that every employee did what they could to contribute. And the way that they did that was by actually voluntarily cutting their own salary to the extent that they were able to for their own livelihood to contribute what they can back to the company so that the company can continue to live another day. Right. And so here's the thing. The story isn't over, right? Gravity Payments is still going through this adverse situation. Quite frankly, if you're listening to this right now, and I am in no way affiliated with them, if you know a small business that needs to do payment processing, they should consider partnering with Gravity Payments because their identity is something to be, supported and partnered with. But we don't know what will happen. They might continue to lose business, right? They're bleeding a ton of cash still because of the hit that they've taken through all this. And they, again, might have another all hands where everybody says, you know what, we might have to furlough some people as a more advanced measure. And then they might have an even worse case scenario where they can't get through that. And then, they might have to lay off people. But the crazy thing is that everybody as a collective within that company would have gotten to that conclusion as a team together. And,
I love that.
And so I only call that out because, like I said, we're seeing both sides of the coin. We are seeing very negative corporate and personal identities, and we're seeing very positive. And so as much as there are situations like the Bird situation where I cannot believe that is something that happened, like it blows me away. It feels like something out of the show Black Mirrors from Netflix. There is for every one of those, there's also going to be a situation that just completely reinstills your hope and inspiration and positivity for humanity. And I bring up the Gravity Payments one because I think they're the antithesis that. So, I mean, overall, that's my summation of it is, Bird was nuts. I can't believe they did that. That is definitely not the way to go about it. And then I wanted to follow that up with an example of, how I'm seeing it done successfully right now from a company perspective. Any thoughts on that?
No, I think it's great. You kind of put both sides of the coin, and, current events is always something, funny right now, as I call it, because a lot of things are negative, right? But I think in these times, taking some of the sequence of events that are happening at companies and, kind of picking it apart and being like, hey, you know what, is this the best way to do it? Is a right step forward to building, better companies. It's a right step forward to humanity. It's a right step forward to making sure that people are protected. And so I think, I don't want to, beat the dead horse, but one last thing on this topic is that you're right, Matt. There's no right way to do it. But as a family, families make decisions together. We sit there together. We talk about the pain points. We talk about an action plan. We try to overcome it together. And yes, there's no perfect way, but I'm just talking about myself, and this is my personal opinion on this. If you're going to lay me off, sit me in a room, tell me about what's actually happening, everyone knows what's happening. You're going to be able to digest it, right? sit in a room and actually tell me and be like, you know what, we're actually short on cash. We have too many people. We thought that we are going to get X number of sales, but we actually didn't hit these targets. And so we're going to have to do layoffs and you were affected. However, we want to ensure that you're going to be okay. And we've put together an action plan here to ensure that you're going to still have benefits. You're going to still get walked through all of this. And it's going to definitely, and I can assure, using my accounting brain, and I don't even need to use an accounting brain, that it's going to take a heck of a lot longer than 2 minutes. And it's really about, give me the dignity where it's like, sit me in a room, right? Take a
or
15
a direct
minutes. This could be done in 15 minutes.
Or a 1-to-1 Zoom call rather than a 1-to-400. And, you as a company might not want to go into all the details about why this is happening. But at least giving them the respect of doing something face-to-face rather than one-to-many.
Matt, my accounting brain's going off right now because of this. So, I'm doing the math on the calculator right now.
Okay.
400 times, I'll say 15 minutes, all right, at total. So that's 6,000 minutes divided by the 60. That's 100 hours of time for 400 people. Is that worth it? I'd say so. You?
I mean, I think 100 hours of time compared to running the risk of having your brand in the market can be completely and irreversibly shot for when you do come out of this. I think 100%, right? That's just even the business perspective, not even the human perspective. The human perspective is just what's right.
Yeah.
So I think to pivot a little bit, right? The reason why I think we wanted to highlight, specifically, the bird situation and how it kind of doubles back to what we want to talk about today, which is fear, which is a lot of situations like that create unnecessary fear. It's like
Agreed.
Fear terrorism, right? And so today, to double back, we really want to dig into our fears and identify, define, and start to cultivate resilience where we can take action against our fear and just any adversity that we're confronting. So let's get into today's topic. And I think that we're going to have a lot of really good takeaways.
Right.
About, personally, we're going to put ourselves out there, get vulnerable, put our own fears out there, and then start to talk about, how we can cultivate resilience, which is truly the strength and speed with which we respond to our adversity. So, Sam, I'll pass it off to you, right? I know we did some kind of take-home exercises before this, but maybe you can start to list out, what are some of the biggest fears that you have right now?
I don't have any fears, man. I'm hard as rock. All right. Are we actually doing this, man?
Done. Yeah. Get vulnerable. This is it.
Okay. Let me think here. All right. We're doing this. I know I was going to say I'm hard as rock, and I've only cried once in my life, and it was when I was born. Clearly not true. So I'm trying to digest here on myself. And so when I look at fears, I really bucket them into two categories: minor fears and major fears. And looking through, I think some of those, categories can range from, fear of poverty, fear of criticism, fear of ill health. There's fear of losing someone that you love, fear of old age, fear of death. And obviously the list goes on. Each and every one of us are different. But for myself, when I categorize them, there's minor fears and there's major fears. And when I say minor, these are things that really, they're mistakes of my own, right? I've made a mistake at work. I'm worried about what other people might think of me there. I have a pretty loose filter, I would say. A lot of my high school friends call me no filter. And so I worry that I'll say the wrong things to people sometimes. I'm on this podcast. I worry that sometimes, making this podcast, I'm going to say the wrong things. And I want to address some of those minor fears as well. So I guess I can even pull this out, right? Where one of my minor fears is as I'm going, so mistakes at work, let's just use an example, right? I recently set up an automation tool for recruiting, and it accidentally, so instead of putting my signature on it, it said your name instead of Sam Kwong, right? And it got sent out to someone, and the fear in my head, I call it a minor one, was like, oh shoot, how did this do that? But one of my good friends in recruiting, Reese, actually saw that out of nowhere. This random person posted about it and let me know. And that's where the fears to come because I was like, I don't know this person. And it seems like they're trying to defame my character for an error that I made. And so the fear started coming in, and I'm thinking, oh, my reputation's going to be ruined. There's all these things that are happening. What's this going to do to me? Why does this person hate me? I think that was more of a minor fear. But then I started to digest and I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? This person's probably just using content to actually share with people to show that she's serving justice. And honestly, I'm not even pointing fingers at her. And I don't want to bring up the name as she did as well, because it doesn't make me any better of a person. But I want to white label it that this did happen and it was a minor fear. But in effect, I actually just said, hey, what can I do? And so I thought to myself, okay, I think all I can do is just apologize, take ownership of it. And I actually just looked her back up and I sent her a message that kind of went along the lines of, hey, I want to apologize. The above message was sent unintended from a software tool that I newly used. I take ownership, and my apologies for wasting your time, if any, with the message above. And it was just simply because of that, message. But again, those are minor fears. And I know it sounds kind of high schoolish, right? But I'm trying to get over those fears by taking accountability for it. But the major fears that I want to actually talk about now is more, I sit down and think about my major fears, and I'm thinking that for me personally, the roots and values of who I am are typically the notion or the focal points of where my fears come from. And this ranges from family, friends, and health. I feel that at the core, if anything affects my family, friends, and health, I'd be the first one there and the last one out. And so I really drive down to the roots and the values, because I think all of my fears come from family-related events, friends, or health. And some people might ask, well, where's wealth? And I actually take it back and say, well, if you don't have wealth, it affects my family. And because it affects my family, that's the root, right? And when it comes to friends, same thing, right? And health, obviously, if you don't go and do your workouts, if you're not putting in the daily time, it's going to affect your health. And that's where the fear of death, the fear of, not being in a certain state of not just physical aptitude, but mind as well. That's when I start to build those fears. But there's a lot of things I'm scared of, Matt. And, I don't really vocalize it a lot, but yeah, I'm scared of ghosts too, scary movies. My wife tries to get me to watch scary movies. That never happens, but I try to act tough like I'm watching. But yeah, those are a lot of mine, Matt. And am I proud of them? No. But I think I'm starting to, identify them more and more. But what about you, Matt? Are you scared of anything? Are you afraid of the dark?
No, I'm the Hulk, Sam. Like you said, I don't need a heart. If I don't have a heart, I don't have to feel. And if I don't have to feel, then again, unfortunately, that means there's no light or any darkness, right? Without darkness, there is no light. So I think that's why we're kind of going deep into some of this stuff to highlight some of my fears. And I think you hit on some of the higher level topics, but I'll get super granular on some specific ones. And I think the fears that we hold, I'm going to go ahead and go out on a leap and say that I think these are very common human condition fears, right? You would have to not have a heart to have some of these fears at some point in your life. And I think one of those fears is just around the short amount of being very cognizant about the short amount of time I have left to potentially spend with my parents and kind of the older generation in my family. I think that really hit home when my grandmother died just shy of 95 years, about 2.5 years ago. It was kind of like there was this whole level up in my family where I went from being the bottom generation, right, the kids, right, to being the adults in the middle, right? And then, I think, my dad said it best, right, to even quote one of his fears. I mean, he's like, I feel like I'm on the, I'm in the batter's box and I'm ready to get up to start to hit home plate. And by home plate, he meant like death, right? Which is super scary to just like have my dad hear that. And I think we were all very cognizant of it because she was the matriarch of that whole generation. And once she passed, it was like this huge tectonic psychological shift for all of us where we all moved up, right? But that, and then, I think another one of those fears is, as I think I mentioned on the prior podcast, I have a going on 6-month-old baby at home. And I think one thing about having kids makes you realize is, one, how fleeting time is, right? And just how vulnerable we truly are, right? And with her, one of my biggest fears, and again, it's not something that I don't even know if I could totally control, is just not being around to see her grow up, not being around long enough for her to have, good, strong memories of me. Going back to my grandmother, and why I'm so thankful is I had, 28 years of my life with her, 27 years of my life with her. And those are, core foundational building years that even if I went the rest of my life, I would still, that she's a part of me now. But you have to invest that time and be around with people. So I think that's something that really scares me. And those are probably the two main ones. I think outside of that is just, having a kid, really puts you on blast and makes you feel like you're the provider, right? You got to bring home the bacon, so to speak. And so my fears are around, potential inadequacy at work, or, with everything going on. And I think this is a very common fear right now. Like, how am I going to provide successfully? How am I going to get scrappy and making sure I'm, bringing home what needs to be bring home, so we can have the quality of life that we were accustomed to, which isn't, overly lavish, but, also quite frankly deserve. And also being able to give her, I think, everything that I was given. So, giving her a good education and giving her all the extracurricular activities and, the daycare and the ability to travel. My parents, helped me study abroad, right? And that was a huge core changing experience. I want to be able to give that for her. So I think a lot of it is very much rooted in the family and the death stuff. That I think ultimately truly scares me. And outside of that, just being able to provide successfully for my family through, getting proper work and work that I think is fulfilling to me. So what are your thoughts on all that?
You're scared of a lot of things, Matt.
Yeah, I know.
Just like me.
Well, at the end of this podcast, once we close it off, we can have go back in a room and just have a good cry together. Virtually, because we got to be socially distanced.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we identified it, right? Because I think that's one of the main things, and we kind of talked about it in our first podcast, right? Just being able to identify it. So I'm glad at least you and I we picked it apart. But we could delve into the negativity of it all as well. But I think one of the share that I noticed in the last couple of days as well, through this all, is really friends and family. When it comes to friends and family, they're really helping ease out some of these fears. And what I mean by this is, I'm seeing a lot of random acts of kindness. I'm seeing a lot of I see silver lining through this whole COVID-19, which is teaching a lot of people a little bit more patience, right? It's being a little bit more creative. Two examples here. One, I was at the grocery store. They actually have it marked. I don't know if you have this in the US right now, Matt, but basically they have 6 feet apart, right? These stickers, and you basically have to wait in line. And I was at the, we call it the real Canadian Superstore. So
Canadian Tire?
No, not Canadian Tire, but yeah, no, it's called Superstore, right? But the full name is the Real Canadian Superstore, owned by Loblaws. And so I was there, and basically there's a huge line. So when you go grocery shopping now, right, it typically takes like almost 45 minutes to an hour. But I think what I'm trying to address here is the silver lining is I'm 6 feet apart. And as I'm waiting, typically, I'm an impatient person, impulsive. I'm like, hey, why am I waiting here? I just want to go home, cook my food, and like move on with my day. But then I'm 6 feet apart, and I'm just having conversations with people. Like he was, 6 feet down, and they were just like, hey, isn't this the line? And we just started up a conversation, random person, and we laughed. And the next thing you know, I was in the front of the line. And I was like, wow, this is great. I'm connecting with people. But I think the big one that I really saw was I had myself and my wife's college friend, Nicole's birthday came up yesterday. It was her 31st. She's born on 4/20, and her boyfriend just honestly kind of made me look a little small, you know? It's like I have to pick up my game to my wife. Basically, what I did it was a couple days before, a day before, he drove to, 15 or 20 friends' places, delivered cake. So basically, got the cake, ordered it, cut it in slices, and went around the whole city, right, to deliver this piece of cake. And we're coming all together, right? And I'm just thinking in my head, why am I bringing this up? I think as it relates to the topic of fear, when I see these random acts, of kindness, and it's not random, it's his girlfriend. Now, I don't know, maybe he wants to get lucky tonight or whatever, but I think it's more than that. He truly cares about her, and I think, doing something like that during this time, it helps lower down my fears, because I feel as if when I have these Zoom calls, right? These 15 people Zoom calls, 3 people Zoom calls, even this podcast, through my friends, I thank them because they're able to weave in a sense of security. It's like a security blanket, so to speak, right? And so, do you get that feeling, Matt, or?
Yeah, totally. And I think as we kind of go later into the podcast, ultimately what we're trying to do is get to a place where we can take action on these fears, but also and give people useful exercises that they can employ. And one of those is going to be talking about how we can cultivate attitudes of appreciation, which you inadvertently did, right? Where you kind of, rather than focusing on ultimately the negative of the situation, was like, man, like going to the grocery store is going to take really long. You turned it into the positive and you're like, wow, I actually really appreciate right now the patience that is everybody's going to have, and it increased the human connection as a result. Or you're seeing, rather than pointing to the negative of whatever you're dealing with, the adverse situation, you're choosing to look at the potential positive of, I cannot believe that this person's boyfriend took his whole day to drive around the city to deliver slices of cake to all her friends just as a gesture of how much he loved her, right? So we'll talk about that later, but it gets into how can you create that frame of mind to whatever's going on so that you can see the positive and not just the negative. Because it mentals everything, right? And so
100%.
I want to, as we go through this, we'll continue to reference back on our fears and what we believe are fears that are probably fairly common to, individuals, across the board, right? These are all just general human condition fears. So as we go through this, we're going to start to reference back to these fears as almost case studies. And when we talk about kind of the tips and exercises and strategies that we hope to provide here to you, the viewers. But before that, we need to get ourselves, as I said, it all starts mental. We need to get ourselves mentally ready. And Sam, you and I kind of mapped out, as we kind of thought about what that looks like from a framework perspective, really 6 steps to start to prepare yourself and start to taking action around your fears, right? So step 1 is what we just did. We identify and defined our fears. We allowed ourselves to be vulnerable, and we put out on paper what we're truly scared of. Okay. The next step is starting to prepare yourselves mentally for action. And so maybe you can talk about those 6 steps, that framework of getting people mentally ready to starting to take action on their fears.
So I'll start by listing them out really quickly, and then I'll go through each one and summarize as well. So the 6 steps that we typically go through, and I like to actually note down, is number 1, identify your fear. Number 2, acknowledge your fear. Number 3, this is where you start to accept that the fear is just a signal, for example, to get prepared for something. And number 4, get confident about what you can really start to do. Number 5, this is where you get certain that eventually you will and you can overcome it. And lastly, number 6, I would say this is where you want to start to get yourself excited and take action. And so identify, we've already done that, so I don't want to go too far in, but acknowledging your fear, this is something as simple as, hey, I'm afraid of playing a sport. I'm afraid of a marathon because I am afraid that I actually have to wake up in the morning to actually prepare for the workout. I'm afraid of podcasting because I'm worried that there's people out there listening and I'm worried about what they think about me. Step number 2, acknowledge that. Step number 3, accepting your fear as an end. It's just a signal to get prepared for something. This is an approach where you can start to just dive into things. And one of the examples here is start to journal, right? Start to dig into the fear as well. Write some of these things down. Accept. Number 4, when we talk about getting confident about it, I like to use that marathon example again, where it's getting confident not by the fact that you know you have to finish a marathon, but it's the process that you actually have to go through. It's the days and the hours and the minutes of each and every day. It's the whole process. And typically people that have actually ran marathons, my sister, which is, my wife's sister actually, and my brother-in-law as well. So my sister and my brother-in-law, they are amazing people. They're machines, right? And they're able to run. And I always feel that, when it comes to a marathon, what they've always told me, it's not really about the race where you finish. It's about the journey and the process of each and every day. That's the hardest part. And so I think that's good, where number 4, you want to get confident about it. Number 5, get certain that you can and will overcome it. And so that's really just telling yourself, regardless if it's mentally, you're writing it down, I will overcome my fear of criticism. I will overcome this or that, whatever your example might be. And this is getting certain about it. So once that's actually primed, I would say the 6th is, I would say, the one that excites me the most, which is, getting excited and taking action. And there's, someone by the name, an author, a really great book, Success Through a Positive Mental Attitude, by the author Clement Stone. And so he's obviously no longer here, but from Chicago, businessman, philanthropist. And I actually love one of the quotes he writes, which is, thinking will not overcome fear, but action will. And when I think about that quote, I'm like, dude, you are pretty witty, You're witty in the sense where it's like, yeah, you could think about, this fear all day. You can't control it, but unless you put it into action and actually take it out, right? And exhaust it and just say, hey, you know what? I'm actually going to do something about it. That's where it's always going to be a fear. And so going through this list 1 to 6, I feel like it takes us all the way to the cliff, but eventually we have to jump as well, right? And so when we do take the jump, we need to ensure that we've already primed our brains, we've worked through this. And I just wanted to summarize that those 6 steps are really essential, at least for me, when I actually go through things now as well. And based off of the research, and I'm actually applying it to my day-to-day, my weeks to weeks in the last couple of months, it's actually, working quite well, right? But Matt, what do you think about these 6 steps, and what are your thoughts?
I think they're super, super helpful, again, in getting to the right frame of mind as we start to jump off the cliff. I think the biggest thing about taking action that you kind of have to put an asterisk around and frame it is, quote unquote, what I would call sphere of influence. Mm-hmm. You can only control certain aspects of whatever is scaring you. And it's important to acknowledge that, because if there's something that is outside of your control, there's no point dwelling on it. So an example of that is, mm-hmm. You're scared of, the fact that, maybe you're sick and you're eventually going to die. Well, you can't control if you're going to die or not, mm-hmm. Or when that will happen. Mm-hmm. What you can control, right, for example, might be how you go about investing in your health from that point forward, mm-hmm. right? So going to the exercise, doing the doctors, doing things to maintain mental clarity, mm-hmm. running the best race possible to give you the highest likelihood of success. Mm-hmm. And then from there, starting to develop a relationship, because again, I feel like almost this example is tough, because the truth is I've never been in someone's shoes where, again, we're all going to die, but mm-hmm. some sooner than others. And I think ultimately, I can't say for certain how to best go about it, but I do know you do your best to kind of mm-hmm. control what you control, and then outside of that, you let nature, potentially take its course. Um, the other thing that I think really kind of resonated with me was actually saying and instilling, whether it be through affirmations or otherwise, in the 6 steps, confidence in yourself that you can overcome this. And this gets into, ultimately, as we start to take action, cultivating resilience, which I defined earlier, is the strength and speed to our response to adversity. And the way that we develop our mental models around creating adversity can either slow down the rate at which we overcome adversity or power through it and come out of it. And one of those is an individual called Martin Seligman. He's a longtime behavioral cognitive psychologist, and he studied that there's quote unquote 3 P's that can stunt your recovery coming through an adverse situation. One is personalization. So you have it in your mind that it's because of me that this situation is happening. Right? So when something negative happens in your life, someone breaks up with you, you think it's because of you. It might not necessarily be because of you, but you think it is.
Yeah.
Right? The second one is pervasiveness. That's the second P. And so pervasiveness is essentially you think that at that time that because this awful situation happened or is happening, it now is going to impact every part of your life. That's the second P. That's a pitfall to overcoming some of this stuff. And the third P is permanence. So thinking that this awful situation will impact and its aftermath will impact your life forever. Right? So to take all that and summarize it in a thought loop, right? It's my fault that this is awful. My whole life is awful, and it's always going to be awful. How many of us went through some sort of breakup at some point in our lives, right? A love loss or whatever, where that was the thought loop. It's my fault that we broke up. My whole life sucks because we broke up. And my whole life is always going to suck because we broke up. And so you have to start to break those mental models to start to come out of the situation, right? So the speed of which you come out of the situation. So as you start to take action, there's, 2 things that I would recommend in terms of how you can start to avoid the P's, right? And keep them away. So and the main one is how you use your language, because our language become thoughts, and our thoughts become our actions, and our thoughts and actions become our perspective on reality. So changing your language at its root can actually change how you view the world. So for personalization, rather than saying I'm sorry and I apologize or any sort of route to taking fault for a situation, you have to take that completely out of your vocabulary. So let's just say that, you, like many others right now, have lost your job and you're now asking someone for help with a resume exercise. Saying something along the lines of, I'm so sorry, I apologize for taking your time to do this. That's personalization. You are actually taking fault that you lost your job. The 406 people that were laid off by Bird, it wasn't their fault. It was just something that happened. So taking those words out of your vocabulary starts to get personalization out of it, and you realizing that the situation itself is not tied to who you are, and it's not because of you. And for permanence, taking always and never out of your vocabulary and replacing it with sometimes or lately. So again, getting back to the job search, you lost your job, and with everything going on, you are, worried about finding another one because, not as many people are hiring right now, or there's a lot more competition for the jobs that are out there. Having the mental language framework where you're saying, I'm never going to get a job, creates permanence, right? It keeps you forever in that state that you will never get a job because your perspective becomes your reality. but saying, you know what, I'm sometimes going to have trouble finding jobs is a much better way of going about it, because you're acknowledging that, quite frankly, this isn't the last time you might have to search for a job. And learning how to go about this process in a positive way and see it as an opportunity to gaining a skill set can actually empower you. So taking a step back, and then I also have kind of 2 exercises I want to talk about as well that I think can be super helpful in taking action. But what are your thoughts on the 3 Ps? Because I think you hit it in your 6-step sequence innately, but I wanted to define that more directly because it's pretty actionable when you put it that way. Ultimately, the goal is to try and avoid those mental models.
I actually, honestly, I'm amazed at how this worked. You know, I took us to the cliff, and then you actually took it off the cliff, and you're like, you know what? I'm going to give you a parachute, right? And I think what I really liked about this is, you could probably see me doing this, Matt, but I was writing all this down, right? Because I thought, you know, a lot of the content you were actually sharing was it's gold, right? The 3 Ps, I actually quite like it in the sense where, you know, the personalization, pervasiveness, permanence. I like that these are things that can help me overcome my fears, but I'm also aware that it's going to take time. You know how sometimes so I'll give you an example. When you mentioned how you use the language changing from I'm sorry to I apologize.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just going to bring that up. As Canadians, we apologize for every little thing. Oh, I'm sorry your car hit me. I'm sorry, you know, I opened the door for you, right? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And so I think it's taking out of the vocabulary. And here's the thing. It's not a bad thing to be apologetic, right? But I think what you're trying to say is, you know what? When it comes to serious things, right? You're not beating yourself over for it, right? I lost my job. I apologize, but I'm taking 10 minutes out of your time to help me find a job. It's like, okay, change that. Yes, I agree. But I think the nature of apologies are good, but I think it's just to the extreme side that I actually really like, you know, this 3P format. And so I love 3 Ps, NEPs.
Okay.
Sorry.
Awesome.
I'm getting immature, Matt, you know, but
yeah. Okay. All right. So, you know, that's kind of the first actionable step, right? Yeah. Define the 3 Ps, know what they are, do what you can to start to avoid those mental models. The second one is really 2 cognitive behavioral exercises that I think we've talked around in some form, but I want to define it directly because I think these exercises are super helpful in starting to confront what truly is the root of your fears, but also putting it in context and taking you away from it's not just getting you outside of yourself and focusing on the bigger picture and actually appreciation of what you do have. Because then the magnitude of your fear is just hugely lessened. And the first cognitive exercise that I recommend everyone go through, right? So once you've defined your fears and you've gone through the 6-step sequence that you kind of mentioned, and now you know about the 3 Ps, here's an exercise that you can go do, right? And you write down your fears or write down a belief that is causing you anguish, right? So I lost my job and I'm never going to get another one, for example. Once you've written that down, and start with the biggest ones first, the lowest hanging fruit, the big elephants in the room, follow it up with proof that is false. For example, going back to it, I lost my job and I'm never going to get another one. Proof that is false is, well, you got a job before, so why isn't that you can't do it again? Right? And you can go down that and you can continue to list, out falsehoods that are implicit in the things that we tell ourselves that are quote unquote negative feedback loops. And it starts to break those mental models where you're reframing your perspective on what's actually true versus what is kind of that demon inside of us that is kind of telling us the stuff that keeps us down. So that's one very useful exercise that I would recommend everyone do. And then the second one is when you're dealing with a negative situation, and this might seem counterintuitive, attempt to list out how things could actually be worse, right? generally, when we are in a negative situation, our mind is trying to get out of it by trying to think about how we can make it better, or trying to force ourselves to think about positive thoughts. I'm suggesting the antithesis of that and actually saying, think about how this can actually be a worse situation, right? So, for example, I mentioned, my grandmother passed away, and it was from heart disease, right? And 2.5 years ago. How could that situation be worse? That heart disease that got her could potentially affect someone else in my family. It could run in our genes. I mean, my grandfather died 20 years ago from heart disease, clearly, right? So maybe at the same time or around the same time, a heart ailment, knock on wood, affected someone else that I care about in my family. And then when you start to wrap your head around that, and then, in my mind, what's going on there right now is like, well, shit, I am just so gosh darn thankful for everyone that I still have with me. And I'm not thinking about, oh man, I lost my grandma, although that did suck. And it took me a long time to come through it and have a positive relationship to her death, right? And to deal with the grief of it. Again, reframing what ultimately that exercise puts in front view what you're actually appreciative for. So it creates an attitude of appreciation for what you do have, rather than the negative emotions owning you about what you don't. So those are also two very useful exercises that I would absolutely recommend anyone that's encountering a serious situation of adversity go through to reframe the mental models and thought loops that they're telling themselves. What are your thoughts on those two things, Sam?
I think, Matt, that puts it into a lot of perspective, because I was doing a lot of self-reflecting, and this week I would say is when I really started to put some of these exercise and some of your sentiments into practice. And it's because obviously we're researching, we're doing a lot of thought analysis on this, but I realized that when I identified that friends and family and health were my majors, I realized that that's the focus area that I should be putting more time into. And this week, I really want to dedicate a lot of my sanity to my friends, each and every day this week. And I'm talking about the silver lining of COVID again here. Each and every day, I was able to catch up with, if not one, at least two of my friends. Yesterday, because it was a birthday, as I mentioned, we caught up with like 15 or 20 people. But why I'm thanking my friends and family and support system here is because every conversation that I have, it makes me so much more thankful, because my fear is that I'm never going to see my friends and family again. Those biggest, darkest fears. And because of that, talking to them kind of alleviates that. And why I say talking to them really helps me is because I felt like I was living under a rock before COVID. And I'm getting a little personal here, but I felt as if, wow, some of these friends that I claim to know for 5, 10, 12 years, I never even knew that they adopted a dog, for example. They had all their dogs. And, when you sit in front of a camera and you lose things to talk about, you're most interested in what everyone else is doing. It's crowdsourcing information. And that's where I'm like, wow, I didn't know one of my good friends, Cynthia, adopted a dog. I didn't know that, 4, 5, 6 of them, their thought process of how they actually went about getting a dog. Because, during this time, I think a lot of people are getting dogs. But I think for Amanda and I, my wife and I, we're like, hey, what's it like to own a pet? We just wanted to know. Are we ready to have a pet? I don't think so. Not at the right time. Or at least I don't think so. And so I'll talk to her about that. But my main point here is that I think through the friends this week, I'm so thankful. And hey, I almost did what you actually see. This is the part where it's actually hard, Matt. I almost apologized for something, right? Where it's here, I'll say what I was normally going to say. I apologized to them for like the last 10 to 15, 13 years that I never took time out of my day to actually really, when I say really connect, it's like talking about shit that matters, right? And so I think the 30 minutes that I'm actually doing, and I'm talking about the silver lining, is the people that are actually, setting up, whether it's House Party, whether it's Zoom or Google Hangouts, taking more action there, is a really good start to, not only getting us through COVID, but after you're going to have a more robust relationship. So super thankful for that. And I think my closing thoughts are this, Matt. One of the tips that really got me through this week was two things: celebrations. This is a time where anything that you could really celebrate, note it down. It could be a birthday, it could be a wedding anniversary, it could be your mom's and dad's anniversary, it could be, one of your cousins, right? Think of your whole family, think of everyone around you, and think of any anniversary that you could note down. And so one of the things I did this week, a lot of the good friends' birthdays that I have, where I don't remember their actual birthday, I actually just shot a message to each and every one of them, right? I wrote all their names down. I shot a message. I was like, hey, when's your birthday? And, the immediate thought to myself was like, oh, you could actually find this information on Facebook, but I think a lot of people take it off now. So asking them for it, I actually wanted to mentally log it in, but also update it on my calendar, because you're not just going to remember all your friends, right? And put it this way, I don't have a lot, but it's a significant amount where I want to actually have it logged in. But just that one little exercise allowed me to tap into something a little bit more personal, where at every birthday now, I don't care if COVID's around or if it's behind us in the past, I'm going to do something special for them, right? And it's going to be, it might even just take 5-10 minutes. It might be a call, it might be a little present, whatever it is, but just celebrating those things. And I think that's what I wanted to share as closing thoughts, where when it comes to fear, there's a lot of things that you could be scared about. Now, if you're worrying about, your food spoiling right after you bought it, I think that's a little extreme. Maybe go see a doctor. I'm not a doctor here, but I'd say that's a little bit extreme. But my closing thoughts on fear is that you're not going to get through it alone. You got to rely on the community, which are a makeup of your friends, your family, Matt, you included, this podcast that, we've started. This gets me through all of it, right? And so I really do hope that everything we shared today, we were able to, say it concisely, clearly, and tie it up. But those are my closing thoughts, and I'll pass it back to you, man.
So thanks for sharing that, Sam. I think for my closing thoughts, it's this. Suffering, and to get a little bit philosophical, the Tibetan monks talk about how suffering it's a human condition. There is no life without suffering. Suffering in the form of loves lost, lives lost, jobs lost.
True.
It's not if those things will happen, but when. Suffering is a core tenet of the human condition. There is no escaping it if you are living here and listening to this podcast right now. If you haven't gone through something or some sort of adversity, either you're not acknowledging it as an adverse situation or something will happen. And that's unfortunate. But as with everything, it can be used as an opportunity to grow and develop, right? And versus, something that cripples us. And so lastly, I kind of just want to end with, a quote around resilience, because ultimately this whole podcast and why we came together, Sam, is to help empower people as they go through tough times, quote unquote adversity, right? It's in the name of the podcast. And the skeleton key of working through adversity to me is resilience. And so I talked about that high level earlier, again, as the strength and speed of our response to adversity, but I want to talk about where it comes from in closing comments. And then this is a quote that I took from Sheryl Sandberg. If you don't know who she is, she was a huge inspiration for a lot of the tenets that I shared in this podcast. She is the COO of Facebook. So a very smart person. And if you want to dig into this stuff further, go check out her book, Option B, that she wrote together with Adam Grant, who in his own right is a very smart person to, be following. But here's the quote: resilience comes from deep within us and support outside us. It comes from gratitude for what's good in our lives and from leaning in to the suck. It comes from how we analyze the grief and how we accept the grief. That's
great.
Everything, right? That quote, to me, is the culmination of the aim of what we tried to attempt to do for ourselves and for others in this podcast. And so that's where I want to end it. I want to say to everyone out there, no matter what you're going through, Sam and I are there for you. We are going through it with you. You are not alone. And, we wish you the best, and we hope some of the stuff that we shared here today are helpful, some helpful tips and tricks in getting through it.
Mm-hmm. Matt, you make me less scared, buddy. I appreciate all your help here today.
I appreciate it too, buddy.
Thank you so much, man.
Until
next time.
Until next time. Bye.
Ciao, Bella. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, please feel free to share, like, and subscribe to our channel via Linktree. You can find us on all of your favorite podcast sources, as well as YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Until next time, stay healthy, stay happy, and good luck, everyone.